My name is Darrell Sheets. I'm a buyer by trade. I love buying storage sheds. This locker has a little bit of everything. It's just crap.
Picture a man standing in front of a rolling metal door that he has never opened before. He paid thousands of dollars for whatever is behind it. He cannot see inside clearly. He cannot touch anything. He took one look from a distance, raised his hand, and bet his money on a feeling. Now the door is going up, and nobody in the crowd knows what is about to happen. That man was Darrell Sheets. And the story of what he found behind one particular door in California did not just make television history. It changed the course of his life, revealed the kind of person he truly was, and became one piece of a much larger story that millions of people are still trying to understand. Darrell Sheets was born on May 13, 1958, in Los Angeles County, California. His father worked in the junk trade and was a regular presence at estate sales and local auctions. By the time Darrell was 12 years old, he was already going along on those trips, standing in garages and back lots, learning to look at old things the way other people look at new ones. He was not studying in a classroom. He was learning how to see value where other people saw clutter, how to calculate risk quickly, and how to trust his gut in the middle of a crowd. That education never came with a diploma. He dropped out of high school at 16. He worked as a truck driver and a construction laborer and a carpet installer, doing whatever it took to stay afloat. And then, in 1981, when he was 23 years old, he committed himself fully to the world of storage auctions. For nearly 3 decades after that, Darrell Sheets worked in complete obscurity. There were no cameras following him. There was no audience cheering him on. There was just a man who showed up at storage facilities across Southern California, looked at locked units from a few feet away, and decided in a matter of seconds whether to bet or walk. His style was aggressive. He would drop significant money on units that other buyers would not go near. When other people shook their heads and stepped back, Darrell would step forward and raise his hand. The people around him started calling him the gambler. It was not an insult. It was simply the most accurate thing anyone could say about him. He was always swinging for something big. Then, in 2010, a television producer came looking for exactly that kind of energy. Storage Wars premiered on A&E on December 1, 2010, and the format was straightforward. When a tenant stops paying for a storage unit, the facility eventually auctions off the contents to recover the unpaid rent. Bidders gather outside. The door rolls up. They get 5 minutes to look inside from the entrance. They cannot step into the unit. They cannot pick anything up or examine anything closely. They see what they see from the doorway, and then they bid. Whatever the winning bidder paid becomes their gamble. The locker might be full of antique furniture and rare collectibles. It might be full of old mattresses and broken appliances. Nobody knows until the auction is over and the lock comes off. Darrell Sheets was born for that format. He appeared alongside his son Brandon, who was in his early 20s when the show started, and the father and son dynamic became one of the most beloved parts of the whole series. Brandon had grown up watching his father work, the same way Darrell had grown up watching his own father, and seeing that generational knowledge passed down on camera gave the show a warmth that the competitive drama between buyers could not always provide on its own. Brandon would frequently look skeptical when his father pushed bids higher than seemed reasonable. Darrell would grin and keep going anyway. The show also surrounded Darrell with a cast that made for genuinely compelling television. Dave Hester was his most intense rival, aggressive and confrontational in a way that brought out Darrell's competitive side. Barry Weiss was eccentric and unpredictable. Brandy Passanti and Jared Schultz were the young couple trying to turn storage auctions into a stable business. And Renee Nazoda, who called himself the bargain hunter, operated with a precision and discipline that was the opposite of Darrell's all-or-nothing approach. Among all of them, Darrell stood out because he seemed genuinely to love what he was doing. He was not just competing. He was entertaining himself, and that energy carried through the screen. Over the course of the show, Darrell appeared in 163 episodes across multiple seasons. He became one of the most recognizable personalities on the entire A&E network. And the things he pulled out of those storage units became the kind of television moments people still talk about years later. But none of them compared to what happened during one particular auction in Montebello, California, during the show's third season. The unit in Montebello did not look like much from the doorway. There were cardboard boxes stacked around the space, some general odds and ends, and what appeared to be large canvases wrapped and leaning against the back wall. Other buyers looked and hesitated. The price was climbing into territory that made most people uncomfortable. Darrell and Brandon stayed in. The winning bid came in at around $3,600. At the time, Darrell later said, that was more than his monthly mortgage payment. He was betting his mortgage on wrapped canvases he could not examine and boxes he had not opened. When he and Brandon started unwrapping those canvases, they found paintings. Not just any paintings. Beautiful, detailed, richly colored works by an artist named Frank Gutierrez, a celebrated Mexican Chicano painter whose work drew on dreamlike imagery, vivid surrealism, and symbolic scenes drawn from his cultural heritage. Darrell did not immediately know who Gutierrez was, but he knew what quality looked like, and the quality was obvious even to someone who had never studied art history. He brought in Kathy Gallegos, the owner of Avenue 50 Studio in Los Angeles and a certified appraiser of Latin American art, to assess the collection properly. Gallegos went through the paintings carefully. She confirmed they were original oils on canvas by Gutierrez, that they were in remarkably good condition despite having spent time in storage, and that the collection as a whole was worth approximately $300,000. The reveal on camera became one of the most iconic moments in the show's history. A $3,600 bet had turned into the largest single locker profit ever recorded on Storage Wars. But what happened after the cameras stopped is the part of this story that most people never heard about, and it says more about who Darrell Sheets actually was than any of his auction bids ever could. After the episode aired, Darrell did his own research and figured out that the storage unit had actually belonged to Frank Gutierrez himself. The artist's own locker had gone unpaid and ended up at auction. Rather than simply moving forward and enjoying his windfall, Darrell reached out to Gutierrez directly. He later wrote online that the best part of the whole experience was getting to speak with the artist, describing him as a very wonderful man, and he returned the personal belongings that had been mixed in with the paintings. He kept the artwork. He gave back the things that had sentimental value to the man who had created it all. It was a quiet act of decency that never made it into the episode and that Darrell did not make a big show of announcing. That was not his only significant find. During a later season, he bid roughly $15,000 on a large unit that turned out to be packed with toys and comic books on a scale that stunned even experienced collectors. There were G.I. Joes, Hot Wheels, specialty collectibles from multiple eras, and more than 3,000 individual comic books stored in long boxes. The estimated value of the collection landed around $90,000. Darrell called it the Holy Grail of toy finds, and the name stuck. Over the years, he also reportedly found drawings attributed to Pablo Picasso and a letter written by Abraham Lincoln that sold for over $15,000. Storage auctions, at their highest end, could produce results that seemed genuinely impossible. Darrell had a gift for finding the impossible lockers. But not every door he opened led somewhere exciting. Storage auctions are not always treasure hunts. In one episode, Darrell opened a metal lockbox he found inside a unit and discovered what appeared to be a partial human jawbone with teeth still intact. He called authorities immediately. A deputy came, examined the remains, determined they were likely human and possibly of archaeological origin, and took them as evidence. Darrell was never compensated, and the remains were eventually returned to a tribal representative. The locker had gone from potential payday to crime scene in the space of a few minutes. Darrell handled it without drama. That was what the job actually looked like sometimes. Through all of it, he brought the same energy. He laughed at the bad lockers. He celebrated the good ones. He treated every single auction like the next one might be the big hit, because in his experience, it sometimes was. The audience responded to that optimism because it felt real, because it was real. Darrell Sheets had been approaching storage auctions with exactly that mentality since 1981, and no amount of television fame changed the way he approached the work. Then, in 2019, something changed that could not be laughed off. For months leading up to it, Darrell had been dealing with fatigue and shortness of breath. He pushed through it the way a person who has spent decades doing physical labor tends to push through things, by assuming it would pass. It did not pass. In 2019, he suffered a heart attack, and the diagnosis that followed was more serious than that single event. Doctors confirmed he had developed congestive heart failure, a condition in which the heart cannot pump blood effectively enough to meet the body's needs, causing fluid to accumulate in the lungs and making breathing progressively harder. Darrell told his fans himself, plainly and without dramatizing it, through a social media post where he said he had been very sick for 3 months, that he had experienced a heart attack, and that he was asking for prayers. For a period of time, his fans feared the worst. Rumors spread that he had not survived. He did survive. He left the hospital. He recovered enough to keep working, though the physical demands of storage auctions, the lifting, the standing, the hours on concrete floors, were no longer things his body could handle the way it once had. He gradually reduced his presence on the show. His final full season aired in 2022. He officially retired from storage auctions in January of 2023. He moved to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and opened a small antique store that he named Havasu Show Me Your Junk, which is the most Darrell Sheets name for a business that anyone could possibly imagine. From the outside, retirement appeared to suit him. He signed autographs at trade shows. He stayed connected with fans on social media. He ran a shop and kept doing, in a quieter way, the thing that had defined his entire adult life, looking at old things and finding the ones worth keeping. People who followed him online saw someone who had come through serious health problems and landed somewhere peaceful. What was not visible was something much darker. In the months before his death, Darrell Sheets had been publicly calling out what he described as sustained, targeted harassment. On March 11, 2026, he posted on Facebook claiming that 2 individuals had been targeting him online for approximately 3 years, and that if anything happened to him, those individuals should be looked at. He named people. He posted screenshots. He made it as public as he could, the way a person does when they feel like the private channels have failed them. He was not being vague. He was documenting something he believed was genuinely dangerous to him. His longtime Storage Wars co-star Renee Nazoda later confirmed that the harassment had been severe and sustained. Nazoda told reporters that the individual behind it had been impersonating Darrell through phone calls, messages, emails, and websites, and had told Darrell directly that he intended to ruin him. Nazoda said Darrell had shown him the messages, that there were a great many of them, and that the campaign had been going on for an extended period of time. Nazoda also said that in retrospect, Darrell had begun withdrawing from social media in the weeks before his death, which he now recognized as a warning sign he had not understood in the moment. On April 22, 2026, police in Lake Havasu City were called to a residence on Chandler Drive in the early hours of the morning. Officers arrived and found Darrell Sheets deceased. He was 67 years old. 2 weeks later, the Mojave County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that the cause of death was suicide. The toxicology report came back negative for drugs. The Lake Havasu City Police Department confirmed they were aware of the cyberbullying allegations and that those allegations were part of the active investigation into his death. As of the time this was written, no charges had been filed. The gap between the man people saw on television and what he was living through privately is the part of this story that is hardest to sit with. On camera, Darrell Sheets was the loudest, most confident, most unshakable presence in any room he walked into. He shrugged off bad lockers like they were nothing. He celebrated wins with a shout that echoed across parking lots. He projected a kind of joy that made the whole enterprise of bidding on forgotten rooms feel like the greatest adventure in the world. Nothing about the way he carried himself on screen suggested that he was someone who could be reached by cruelty. That projection was not dishonest. It was real in the moments it happened. But it was not the whole picture. The public face of a person and the private life of that same person are rarely identical. Darrell Sheets spent decades building a persona that was built around fearlessness, around the belief that every locked door might be hiding something extraordinary, around the refusal to walk away when others did. That persona served him well for a long time. It made him famous. It made people love him. But screens and personas are not protection against the specific kind of prolonged cruelty that wears a person down not in a single blow but one message at a time, day after day, for years. What Darrell Sheets left behind is a complicated legacy that deserves to be understood in its full dimension. He was a high school dropout who turned his father's garage sale education into a nationally televised career. He raised a son who stood beside him through 163 episodes and learned the same trade the same way. He pulled the largest single locker find in Storage Wars history out of a unit nobody else wanted, and then tracked down the artist to give him back his personal belongings. He survived a heart attack and congestive heart failure and kept going. He opened a shop in a small Arizona town and stayed connected to the people who had watched him for years. He was also a man who, in the last year of his life, felt threatened enough to publicly document what he believed was happening to him, and who could not find a way through it. The cyberbullying investigation remains open. The questions that surround his death may take time to answer, and some of them may never be fully answered. What is clear is that the version of Darrell Sheets that millions of people watched on television represented only part of who he was. The auction floor was real. The finds were real. The laughter was real. And so was something that the cameras never caught, a private weight that the man who always swung for the big hit was carrying alone. Darrell Sheets opened more than 1,000 storage units over 32 years. The biggest thing he ever found was a room full of paintings by an artist he had never heard of. The biggest thing he left behind was a reminder that the people we watch on screen are whole human beings, carrying more than any edit can show, fighting battles that no audience is ever invited to see. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988. Help is available.